So Abigail ended up being so much better than I thought it would be, as when this movie started, I thought, oh god, what am I getting myself in for, as it was so slow in the first act, but then by the second act, and in particular, all of the twists and turns that took place in the final act, I actually thought it was pretty brilliant. And it's all set in a bit of a gothic haunted mansion, which again shouldn't work as everything is just in one location. And typically, when films are like this, I'm not really the biggest fan of them. However, I feel like they made it work really well in this film, as every single room was its own kind of little character. And again, speaking of the final act, the final couple of rooms that you see in those couple of sequences were absolutely brilliant. And it also nods to its classic horror 1930s counterpart in a really cool way, while still having a bit of a modern flair in it as well. And speaking of classic 1930s horror movies, this was originally going to be called Dracula's Daughter, but I wonder, because of the fact that they recently had Nicholas Holt's Renfield movie coming out where he was practically Dracula's slave, they probably thought this is far too much Dracula for one little universe, so they called it Abigail instead. And speaking of which, all of these Universal dark horror movies are all standalone, which is such a shame. I feel like they got so burned by Tom Cruise's The Mummy movie, as the original plan was for them all to be housed under the Universal Dark Universe umbrella, and everything was going to be interconnected. And I am just so gutted that they're not going back to those plans, as they could just do something absolutely brilliant. And Lisa Frankenstein and Renfield and a number of the other ones just haven't been at the same caliber as The Invisible Man, and I'm just really hopeful that they do go back to those plans, as they could do something super exciting here. Hopefully that happens in the future, but as far as Abigail is concerned, I feel like the cast for the majority of them do a good job, so let's go through them one by one. So first up we have Melissa Barrera, who is playing Joey, an ex-junkie and a really edgy character, but also really likeable. And I have to say, Melissa Barrera is just absolutely smashing it as these horror leading lady women, but also just bringing that dark, edgy twist to all of them. I mean, this character is very different to Sam Carpenter, but like I said, I am just loving what Melissa Barrera is doing within this space. We've then got Dan Stevens, who is playing a character called Frank, who is an ex-detective, and I am just the biggest Dan Stevens fan. I think he is absolutely awesome, and I just love the arc that Frank goes on in this movie, in particular what happens to this character in the final act, as Dan Stevens honestly just eats that final act up alive, and he is just so good. And Alisha Weir was absolutely awesome as well as Abigail. I wasn't sure, as of course she was in the Matilda musical lately, so I didn't think that she would be able to play this young vampiric character, but she does it so well. And there are a number of scenes where she is pretty much owning the room as this centuries-old vampiric character stuck in a young child's body. So honestly, she was really wicked in this film. Kathryn Newton feels a little bit typecast by now in terms of playing very similar characters in Freaky, Lisa Frankenstein, and this one. I mean, she does do a good job for the role that she has to play, but I would just love a little bit more versatility rather than her just playing it very safe all the time. But speaking of Lisa Frankenstein, this movie is 10 times better, and her performance as a result is a lot better too. The other characters unfortunately don't make that much of a mark, which was a little bit disappointing, as I was just hoping for this ensemble to feel a little bit more fleshed out, no pun intended. But I guess with these kind of slasher horror movies, then a number of characters are pretty much there just to be killed off, so I guess from that perspective they serve their purpose. Giancarlo Esposito always is a delight to watch on screen. He isn't in this movie that much, but I feel like for the scenes that he does do a really good job, especially starting and ending this film. And if you're a fan of A Discovery of Witches, then you will absolutely love the cameo that they have right at the end of this film, as this character has played a similar character to this before in the past, but I just loved this darker take to him, and I thought it was a really clever idea actually to hire this guy to play this character, as like I said, he has got history in playing these types of characters before. I feel like Radio Silence are really nicely making a bit of a name for themselves. I mean, out of this and Ready or Not, I personally preferred Ready or Not, as I just felt like the mystery and the film in general to me just felt a little bit more intense. So I feel like what they did do in Abigail is really good, but I just personally preferred Ready or Not, and of course Scream 6. And speaking of the Scream franchise, I'm really hopeful that Melissa Barrera does get to continue playing really brilliant characters in Hollywood, as she has really demonstrated that she can really bring so much to a role. And it's just so disappointing that she's not going to continue as Sam Carpenter in Scream 7, but I guess the fact that we've got Neve Campbell back hopefully does mean that we will get Melissa Barrera back one day in the future as well. But as far as Abigail is concerned, I do think it's a little bit overhyped, and because of the overhyped aspect of this movie, I was expecting a lot more from it. But that being said, it is still enjoyable pretty much saved by the final act of this movie, but that final act is absolutely unforgettable. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Abigail a solid 6.5 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Abigail? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.